I put off my dream of becoming a teacher to pay his debt and discovered he used the money to buy a house with his other family. The story of my life with Mark is a slow, agonizing lesson in what happens when you prioritize blind faith over common sense. We met 8 years ago, right when I was finishing my undergraduate degree in English literature. I was 22, idealistic, and ready to start my master's program in education. Mark was 5 years older, charming, and working as a freelance web designer, a career path that sounded exciting and ambitious. We were the perfect pair. He was the dreamer, and I was the sensible, grounded one. We were planning a future together, and that future, unfortunately, came with a crushing weight of inherited responsibility. Mark had significant debt, and I mean significant. It wasn't reckless spending, it was medical debt from a serious illness his mother had endured years before, followed by the disastrous failure of a short-lived tech startup he tried to launch. He owed close to $60,000, a number that sounded astronomical to us back then. He confessed this to me a year into our relationship, tearfully admitting that the debt was keeping him from feeling worthy of me. He said he couldn't propose until he was debt-free, and he hated that the burden was hanging over our potential life together. My heart broke for him. I saw his debt not as a failing, but as a challenge we could tackle as a team. He was ambitious, but the interest rates were suffocating him. That was when I made the fatal decision. Instead of applying for my master's program, I decided to defer for a few years. I took the full savings I had accumulated for graduate school, about $25,000, and handed it directly to Mark. "We're a partnership," I told him. "This is our future. Use this to pay off the highest interest loans. We can wait for the master's degree. I'll take a higher-paying office job in the meantime." Mark was ecstatic. He called me his hero. He promised that once the debt was under control, he would make it up to me tenfold. He said he'd pay off the rest and then personally fund my master's program when I was ready. I switched gears immediately. I gave up the bookish environment of the university and took a job as an executive assistant at a large, soulless law firm. The money was good, but the hours were brutal, and I hated every second. Every late night, every impossible deadline, every document I filed felt like a brick I was laying toward our shared debt-free future. For 5 years, I worked that job. Mark, meanwhile, seemed to stabilize. He was working more consistently, and every 6 months he would show me digital receipts proving substantial payments against the debt. He told me he was down to the last $20,000. We talked endlessly about the life we would build once that final payment was made, a small wedding, a down payment on a modest house, and finally my return to school. Those plans were the only thing that made the endless, boring work worthwhile. But after 5 years of sacrifice, the doubts began to creep in. Mark started protecting his finances. He always paid his bills in cash or from a separate password-protected account. When I asked him to log into our shared investment account, he'd stall or make an excuse about the security system being down. He stopped talking about the debt with the same intensity. When I would ask about the final payment, he would wave it off. "It's being handled, honey. Almost there." My turning point came 3 months ago. My job at the law firm was eliminated in a sudden round of budget cuts. I was devastated, but also relieved. "It's fate," I told Mark, pulling out my old grad school application forms. "I can finally go back to school. We can use the severance package for the tuition. And your debt is almost gone, right? We're free." Mark's reaction wasn't excitement. It was cold panic. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't hug me. He stammered. "You can't go back now, Maya. The debt,
It's not 20,000, it's still close to 50. I haven't been able to make the large payments I told you about. I stared at him, my heart sinking. 50,000? I had given him $25,000 of my tuition savings and worked 5 years of soul-crushing overtime, and the debt had barely moved? The receipts he had shown me? He claimed they were just projections, documents he had created to keep me motivated. In that single sickening conversation, I realized I hadn't just lost my education money and 5 years of my life. I had lost my faith in the man I loved. But the complete truth was still hidden, buried deeper than I could imagine.
Mark's confession that the debt was still close to $50,000 left me feeling cold and empty. My relief at losing my job at the law firm was replaced by a hollow despair. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just started moving with a meticulous, dangerous comb. The Mark I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a clumsy liar who couldn't even keep his financial story straight. The core question wasn't about the debt anymore. It was about the $25,000 I had handed him and the 5 years of my life I had invested in his recovery. Where did all that money go? I told Mark I needed space and moved into my friend Sarah's spare room. I told him I needed time to process the betrayal, which was true, but what I really needed was time to investigate. I was still listed on some of his secondary accounts from years ago, utility bills and an old joint savings account we rarely used. I needed a professional eye. I hired an expensive forensic accountant recommended by a former colleague at the law firm. I called her Linda. Linda was clinical and efficient. I laid out Mark's story, debt, the large payment I made, and the fake receipts he had shown me. She got to work. After 3 weeks, she called me for a meeting. She didn't mince words. "The debt is real, Maya," Linda said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "The $50,000 is accurate, but the $25,000 you gave him, he paid off less than $5,000 of the principal. The rest went somewhere else, not into his business, not into gambling. It was a clean transfer." She pointed to a single transaction in late 2021, 2 years into my sacrifice. A large block of money, around $15,000, had been transferred from his account to a third-party solicitor's office with a reference note, "Closing costs." I stared at the screen. Closing costs? For what? Mark and I lived in a rental apartment. Linda, sensing my confusion, pulled up a public property record. This solicitor handled the purchase of a residential property in a different county, about an hour away from here. The property was titled to 2 people, Mark A. Peterson, your Mark, and a Jessica M. Vance. The purchase date aligns perfectly with that large withdrawal. The air left my lungs. Jessica M. Vance. I didn't know the name. A house. He bought a house. I didn't buy it as an investment property, I asked, trying to find a benign explanation. My voice was a choked whisper. Linda shook her head. No. The records show it was immediately declared a primary residence. And one more thing, Maya. You mentioned you two don't have kids. The school district enrollment forms list the property as the permanent address for a Thomas Vance, aged 5, and a Lily Vance, aged 3. He didn't just have an affair. He had another family. He used my sacrifice, my tuition money, and my life savings to purchase a home for the woman he had been secretly building a life with, a woman who had given him 2 children, while I was waiting for him to pay off his debt so we could start our own life. Every late night I had worked at the law firm, every time I had told myself this is for our future, Mark was tucking his other children into the beds of the house I helped pay for. I felt a cold, white rage I had never known. The shame of being the other woman in my own relationship,
the woman he lied to, the woman who funded his real life, was unbearable. I drove to the house alone that day, stopping my car a block away. It was a cozy two-story home with a small fenced yard. As I watched, a woman, who I instantly knew was Jessica M. Vance, stepped out onto the porch, laughing, chasing two small, bright-eyed children. And then Mark stepped out behind her, looking completely relaxed, completely present, a look I hadn't seen on his face in years. He wasn't stressed about debt. He was happy in his true life. I took out my phone and called him. He answered with his usual strained tone. "Hey, Maya, look, I know you're upset. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" I didn't answer the question. I kept my voice low and steady, watching his other family in the distance. "Mark, look out your front window. Do you see the red sedan parked down the street?" I saw him pause, confused, then slowly walk to the window. He saw my car. His body went rigid. The color drained from his face as he realized his two lives had just violently collided. "I know about Jessica. I know about Thomas and Lily. I know you used my tuition savings for your closing costs. The debt wasn't the problem, Mark. You were the problem. I want the house and I want a divorce." I didn't wait for his pathetic response. I hung up the phone, put my car in gear, and drove away, leaving him to face the fallout of the real future he had built on the wreckage of mine. The confrontation was over, but the fight for my stolen life had just begun.
The days and weeks that followed my drive away from Mark's other life were a blur of legal paperwork and cold, calculated anger. I didn't want him back, but I absolutely wanted my life back. Piece by agonizing piece. The divorce was messy, not because of emotions, but because of property and money. Mark fought me, of course. He tried to claim that the $25,000 I gave him was a gift to our relationship, not a targeted payment towards it. He even brought Jessica into the legal fray, trying to frame the house purchase as a separate business venture. Fortunately, Linda, my forensic accountant, had prepared everything perfectly. We had the trail, my large lump sum withdrawal, the immediate transfer to the solicitor's office, and the property deed showing his name. It was irrefutable evidence of financial deception, marital misconduct, and the fraudulent use of my funds. His legal defense, that he intended to pay me back eventually, fell apart immediately. Jessica, meanwhile, was horrified and humiliated, realizing that the foundation of her happy home was actually built on my deferred dreams. I felt no pity for either of them. The court eventually ruled in my favor on the financial claim. Mark was forced to sell the house he bought with my money for his secret family, to repay me. I received my full $25,000 back, plus interest, plus a significant portion of the equity from the house sale as part of the divorce settlement. Watching his perfect life unravel financially brought me a cold satisfaction. But it didn't bring back the 5 years that I had lost. Money is replaceable. Time and trust are not. The emotional aftermath was a deep, crippling isolation. How do you explain to friends that your fiancé didn't just cheat, but he ran a complex, years-long financial fraud, using your deepest sacrifice as his cover? I felt foolish, utterly pathetic. I retreated, spending months trying to decouple the shame of his betrayal from my own self-worth. It was Ben, my friend Sarah's brother, who finally pulled me out of the darkness. He had seen the wreckage of my sacrifice firsthand, and he consistently reminded me, "Mark didn't steal your future, Maya. He just delayed it. He never had the power to take your dream." I looked at the recovered money, which now sat in a high-yield savings account, untouched. It represented not my tuition, but my trauma. I realized I couldn't just deposit it and move on. That money had to be explicitly used for the purpose it was originally intended for, not just as a symbol of recovery, but as a commitment to myself. I took the long-awaited step. I applied for my master's program in education. Not only did I get in, but the years of experience I gained at the law firm fighting for my life unexpectedly gave me a stronger, more disciplined approach to my studies. I started classes 2 months ago. The environment is exactly what I dreamed of. Challenging, inspiring, and full of promise of a future I choose, not one Mark dictated. I look back at the young, idealistic woman who gave away her life savings and 5 years of her career. She was foolish, yes, but she was also incredibly kind and trusting. I don't hate her for the mistakes she made. I honor her sacrifice by ensuring it wasn't truly wasted. The pain of the betrayal is a scar that runs deep, but it is also the foundation of the teacher I am becoming. A teacher who understands the true, agonizing cost of a broken promise. The man who stole my youth is now paying off his own debt, forced to restart his life while supporting 2 families. The house he bought with my money is now owned by someone else, and I am sitting in a university library, studying lesson plans, knowing that the greatest tragedy would have been letting his lie kill my dream forever. He stole my time, but he will not steal my future. My future begins now, and I earned it all by myself.